The Reserve Bank today hiked interest rates up by another 0.5%, the fifth rise in 5 months. The Treasurer immediately said this was tough news for millions.
It isn't a surprise to anyone. The bank had flagged more increases, the markets had anticipated it, and homeowners were expecting it as well. But the fact that we knew it was coming doesn't make it any easier for people. This is tough. For Australians with a typical $500,000 mortgage, it's about an extra $145 a month, in addition to the extra $475 they've had to find since rates started rising before the election in May.
But once again, this Treasurer always sounds like a commentator. He'll tell you what's happened and how bad it is, but he will not tell you what he'll actually do about it. I mean, he listed 3 things today, but they were cheaper childcare for some working mums, actually paid for by the rest of us, and if you don't have children. Cheaper medicines for the sick, well, what if you're healthy? And asking Fair Work Australia to raise the minimum wage by $1 an hour, with the cost then passed on to the rest of us. Whoopee-doo. Joining me is the country's top finance writer, Terry McCrann of the Herald Sun. Terry, thanks for your time. Today's increase in the interest rates, totally predictable, and rates are still very low. But how much higher do you now expect them to go?
Well, there's no way you can put a figure on that, Andrew. It all depends, obviously, on what happens not only to our economy, but to the global economy. We are hostage to what happens in Russia and Ukraine because the impact that has on energy prices. Now, that's been very positive for Australia, if you look at Australia overall, because we're a big energy exporter. We like to give people our energy to use in other countries. We're not so happy to use that energy in Australia, as you well know. But we're pocketing tens of billions of dollars from those higher energy prices. But obviously, Australians are paying the cost of that in their power bills. And I don't think they realise just what's coming in terms of high power prices, irrespective of the dynamic of moving to so-called renewables, just simply what's going to happen over the next year, 2 years, because of the demand for coal and gas and petrol in the global marketplace. So what's going to happen to inflation over the next 12 months? I certainly would expect to take the Reserve Bank's predictions as accurate, as reliable. It doesn't know what's going to happen, so it will really raise interest rates but basically month to month. Next October, we might see a slightly smaller, in October, we might see a slightly smaller increase, but then we get the inflation figure at the end of the month, and that's real for the September year, and that's really going to determine what happens to interest rates in the short to medium term, but obviously into the longer term as well.
Yeah, I got the reading the Reserve Bank statement released today. I got the idea they had no clue what was going on either. But one problem, one mystery really, is that Australians are still spending big despite the previous rate rises, despite inflation. When the idea of these rate rises is to make them spend less and take some pressure off prices, off inflation. Why do you think that is?
Well, that's exactly right, Andrew. The reason Australians haven't been dramatically impacted yet is because employment's been very strong. So people have been and we're starting to see wage rises above what we've been getting over the last 3 or 4 years. Not wage rises that will compensate for the 8% price rises that are now taking place, but certainly higher wage rises than we've seen before. And Australians built up a big kitty through the 2 years of COVID, thanks in part to JobKeeper, thanks in part to the continued employment, where there was continued employment. They built up, as the Reserve Bank has noted, something like over $150 billion of extra savings, which they are now drawing down to maintain spending. So that the economy at core is basically still pretty strong. But we're heading into very choppy waters, and it's very painful waters because it's not only interest rates, it's inflation that pushes up the price of everything. It's higher petrol prices and a range of other imposts that are going to come over the next few months, but particularly when we get into the middle of next year and we get into the winter period. So rates are still extraordinarily low in terms of where they have been previously. I mean, and what's realistic? I mean, Australians have been living in la-la land in getting such what has effectively been free money and been encouraged to go out and bid up prices for property. That was unreality, and we're now getting back to something akin to reality, and it is painful.
Yeah, well, don't forget the excise on petrol is going to go back on in about 3 weeks, and that's another 22 cents a litre.
Exactly.
So Australians will keep getting poorer
24
for
cents.
quite a while yet. I didn't expect, I didn't expect anything from the Albanese government's job summit last week. I knew it was a stitch up, I knew it was a con, but you kind of did hope that the government would come up with some ideas from it. Terry, I saw none that would actually make us richer, none that didn't involve, higher taxes to pay for whatever bright idea they had, like 26 weeks paid parental leave now. What did you see?
Well, as you said, Andrew, the fix was very definitely in ahead of the summit, and there were really only two decisions, none of which had anything to do with actually creating an environment for better jobs, for higher skills going into the future. And those two things were the return to pattern bargaining, so-called pattern bargaining, where the unions can bludgeon small employers across an industry and the Labor government's now Albanese government's now indicating that it won't be an opt-in situation, that employers will be forced to participate in these situations. That's got nothing to do with creating jobs. It's got nothing to do with skilling up jobs. And the second was the increase in the immigration number, up 35,000 to nearly to 195,000. That again has got nothing to do with skills. Most of those immigrants are going to come in, are going to be at the low end of the skills spectrum. And the task is simply to fill those jobs across the community, delivery drivers, hospitality workers, etc. Necessary jobs, but not the sort of skills jobs of the 21st century that this summit was supposed to be all about. So yes, the fix was in. It did nothing to actually address the challenging issues facing Australia into the 21st century.
What a tragedy. What a tragedy. And we haven't even talked about their energy policies, which I think is their suicide note to Australia. Terry McCrann, thank you so much indeed for your time.